I've been to the zoo. Mister, I've been to the zoo.
The Zoo Story by Albee. Hello heroes, hope you are always good. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Cecillia Christina and welcome to analysis video. In this video, I'm gonna do explanations about my analysis, the one egg plays, namely The Zoo Story by Albee. So, here we go. Albee, an American playwright, was born on March 12 in 1928 in Washington, D.C. He was adopted by very wealthy parents when he was 2 weeks old and was named after his adopted grandfathers, Edward Franklin Albee. In 1948, just before his 13th birthday, Albee finished The Zoo Story, the long one-act drama that launched him on his professional career. The story is a story we never heard. Maybe the title is kind of jokes or tease. It's about processing people rather than making you happy with actions or adventure or a love story. The Zoo Story refers to the play itself, too. It's a story about a zoo. Jerry's and Peter's and animals on display for your enjoyment. Questions that Jerry tells to Peter's, "You are an animal too," and the end of the play. And as with the animal in the zoo, it's not always easy to tell why they are snuggling over there, that they are thinking. The story at the zoo is a story of you can quite understand. Do not the less because, like you in animals you're watching are animals too. The Expositions is the introduced background events and the characters. The expositions in this play started when Peter sat on the bench in the place named Central Park, and then Jerry's enthusiasm. It looks like at the beginning Peter doesn't really serve him until Jerry screams a little and has managed to make Peter flinch and look at him. Since in the following questions. Conflict involves a struggle between two opposing forces, as well a protagonist and an antagonist. This drama conflict started when this rising action goes. It's external conflicts. It is a start when Jerry acts loud and Peter become annoyed. Jerry also gave comments when Peter wanted to smoke. You can see in the quotations. Rising action is a series of events that creates suspense in the higher parts. At this stage, the rising actions happen just more talk and particularly longer. Jerry tells the stories about the dogs to Peters, and that's too much. Jerry explains how he finally became close with the dogs. The Landylands dogs Jerry is talking about a giant evil beast with a red erection and a full temper. The dogs attack Jerry. Jerry tries to poison him. It is an epic struggle smack dab in the middle of the play. The longest speech, the Jerry's part in the book. So what's the deal with the dogs? You're probably thinking the dog symbolizes some sort of existence and what's it about the horror of humanity and the cruelty of life. That's more or less right. Good guessing. Like in Jerry tells Peter at the end of the play, Jerry's struggle with the dogs is in a lot of ways struggle with the other people's. It's not just the dog with a mean, confusing, a bitter. It's other people. And Jerry's efforts to communicate with the dogs, first by gentleness and then by the violence might as well be Jerry's efforts to communicate with Peter. Part of the story where the suspense reaches in the highest part. The climax is reached when the Jerry's announce that is a feeding time, the lion cage. Jerry wants Peter to move over, but Peter refuses to do so because he does not want to give up his bench. A battle of the bench is a start Jerry provokes the Peters into the fighting for his bench for everything he brought of. Jerry takes out a knife and Peters become aware of the danger potentials of the situation. He will threaten it. Somehow Jerry succeeds in pushing Peter into the positions of the knife. The catastrophes begin because Jerry threw himself into the knife and is deadly injured. Soon it becomes obvious that Jerry has planned his death. He has planned to commit suicide and Mrs. Peters. Now his sentence in the beginning of the story, you will read about in the newspaper tomorrow if you don't see it on your TV tonight. Does it make sense, right? Is the main conflict start to resolve? Jerry does not want Peters to blame for a crime, he only wants him to be a player in his own zoo story. The fact that Jerry commits suicide is tragic because suicide is always the last solution. For Jerry, it is the only way to escape from the isolation because his desire for communications and building up a relationship to someone has never been finished. As you can see in these quotations, that Jerry says to Peters, is now a part of Jerry's stories has to live with his bad conscience until he will die. He will never forget the Sunday afternoon in the Center Park. And in my opinion, Jerry has achieved his aim. He has established the close contact that has been searching for all his life. The price he pays is high because he pays with his life, but to me it seems that this not matter to Jerry because has success in the deeply involving Peters into the story of his life, although his attempts to enlighten him have failed. Drama ends when the Peter screaming and stumbling when he feels so troubled and said, "Oh my God," before he goes out. The very end of the story has a Peter screaming like that, and then Jerry says, "Oh my God," and then he dies. For the settings of this place, I break into three parts: the place, times, and the setting of atmosphere. The setting place, as we can see at the beginning of the text, there's an explanation about the main settings of place in the story. The story happened in the park which called Central Park and taken the bench where the Peter sat while reading his book. For the time, we can also see in the first prologue the regarding of descriptions of the time when the story took place. The story takes time in the Sunday afternoon at the present. The atmosphere state is present as a several part. For the first sections, in the beginning of his place, as we can see at these questions, a little bit annoying when Jerry enters and comes to Peter with oppressive to get Peter's attention to become aware of his protections. Next, the atmospheres become heated up when Jerry and Peter fight for park bench. This situation is quite tense when Jerry throws his knife at the Peter's feet. Sections. The conditions more complicated and goes tragic when the Jerrys die. Peter witnessed the accidents directly, become confused and anxious. A deep feeling of fear is howling faithful. Oh my God. Despite the figure of Peter who looks to come from upper class at the time, a publishing executive and a family man in his early 40s, Peter is reading in Central Park at the top of the place, when he is interrupted by Jerry. Their conversation, which eventually escalates into a violence, is the centerpiece of the zoo story. Peter embodies confessions and property, and seems to have as if at a dream or American dreams. You can see in the quotations in the previous slide is the explanation Peter is a man early 40s, not very fat and handsome, wearing his tweeds jacket with pipe cigarettes. And let's see of these quotations. In these quotations, it's quite clear that Peter described the positions of his job as an executive in the field of publishing. Jerry, an eccentric transient in his late 30s, Jerry lived in poverty on the Upper West Side and is profoundly lonely. This loneliness drives him to seek companionships from strangers. Jerry is contemplative and critical of society, and is eager to share his opinions about life, love, and isolations with Peter's. Character Jerry in this story is very strong. He can easily influence Peter with a variety of stories that are given, making Peter, who initially didn't really care, and become interested. Loneliness prompted him to seek friendship from strangers. That friendship seems to be what he was looking for in Peter. Even though Jerry isn't a successful and talkative person, there is something he feels, namely isolation. Okay, for the minor characters, even though they are not only characters in the story, the writer still gives several supporting characters to the story. And there's the other characters in the story. They are not as important as major characters, but she plays a large part in the stories. Their actions help drive the story forward. Then there's a Peter family is clearly illustrated by Peter's stories about his wife and two daughters, and showing the following questions. And also we have the Landy Land. Like in the Jerry tells about the lands of the place where he lives, but Jerry doesn't like her. She has a dog who's like to disrupt Jerry's a lot. There are two main themes of this place. This story details what happens when one character's influence on another character's life quickly move on forever. First theme of the zoo story is the absurdity and reality. During the beginning of the plays, Jerry opens up a conversation with the Peters, and then picks a topic with the Peters as a familiar with such a family and career. Moreover, Jerry begins to bring out some strange comments and questions on the directions and the conversations between the two people who are trying to get to know one another. Since when Jerry assumes that Peter doesn't like his daughter's cats, as if Peter's bird is sick, Peter says didn't believe so, and Jerry replies, the absurd and the unreasonable situation in place begin to shake Peter's sense of reality and place. However, Jerry was quick to reply that the moment within the friendly comments and a compelling story to keep Peter's engaged. Throughout the drama, as the Jerry story progresses, he carefully controls the conversation with manifold intimidates Peters. And by the end of the games, Jerry has success in changing Peter's perceptions of reality to such an extent that Peter's angers in sickle fight over what he believes to be his park bench, and in self-defense help Jerry kill himself. And the second time used in this play is loneliness. In the play, Jerry is a loneliness man as represented in the story. Ever since Jerry was a little boy, his mother had left him, and later on his father died. And through Jerry's stories, Peter learns that Jerry lost his parents at the age of 10, and he lives with his aunt who left him after graduating from school. At the beginning of the drama, when Jerry enters the world of Peter, it is clear that Jerry does not have good social skill. Moreover, his aunt died on the day of his graduation from high school, leaving him sad, a lonely man with nobody to talk to or share with. This kind of loneliness makes Jerry feel humiliated and wants to take his life, though he avoids to do so. However, he forces a person to do it, and this is Peter. Moreover, the theme of social contract in this place in the play. In the play, Jerry doesn't discuss anything about the zoo to Peter, but a rather random babbling about his life and the hardships that he goes through in life. Let's talk about the issue. Issue, or the first issue that I get from his displays, is alienation. As Peter and the audience to get to know Jerry, it's become clear that Jerry is primarily motivated by loneliness. All of the decisions Jerry makes in the zoo story are driven by primal drive to contract his deep sense of isolation. Loneliness results not only from a lack of friends and a family, but also from a deep intellectual loneliness, which he has built up over the years, as he realizes there is no one who truly understands and empathises with him. Ironically, his attempts to rebuild his life consist of trying explanation himself and his thoughts to animals, beings that are even less capable of understanding him than the strangers like Peter. In a certain way, then Jerry quests an vicious circle. He works to find intimate, and the redoubles his intensity when he fails, meaning that the next failure will be doubly intense for him. That such a process would end in violence seems almost inevitably tragic. And the next issue is psychological. What I get from this place issues as like psychological, especially from Jerry's side. Like in Jerry's explanations of the pornographic playing cards is one of those intense. Here, Jerry observed the importance of fantasy in a male sexuality. When he was a child, the cards allowed Jerry to imagine become an ideal man, surrounded by beautiful, subservient women. However, now that he has grown into an adult, isolated from a mainstream society, the cards are only a mocking reminder of what he cannot have. Mainstream society both enthuses and demands him. This idea has especially significance if one considers Jerry a closet to a homosexual, and his conventional upper middle class lifestyle embody the pretty insignificant rat race that absurdity tends to abhor. One of the play's master strokes in that these ideas are grounded Jerry's a very real and relatable pain. Jerry's very real and relatable pain, his overwhelming desire to find intimacy in his life. What is the reality tragic about the play is not that we're given to pretty materialism. It is when we have trade compulsions and a transcendent connections for that materialism. Small zoo. Okay, so guys, that's all my analysis about the zoo story by Albee. Hope this video is good for you guys for the analysis. I don't know. I'm sorry if it's full of the likes of my pronunciations or or the noising around me, and thank you for watching. Stay healthy and see you guys. See you heroes.